Well, to discuss Jacob Zuma's new legal team and his massive support, we're joined in studio by political analyst Professor Sipho Siepe. Also, we're joined by constitutional expert Professor Shadrack Guto. Over the phone line, we're joined by a legal expert, Paul Ngobeni. A very good evening to you all, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let me start with you, Mr. Ngobeni. Good evening to you as well. Talk to us about the staying of the prosecution permanently. What exactly does that mean, if you could unpack it for our viewers?
A permanent stay of prosecution essentially means that you are asking the court to essentially dismiss the case in a layman's term, to get the case dismissed so you don't have to stand trial. The case is over. If the permanent stay of prosecution is granted, then the case is over. And the grounds for permanent stay of prosecution, contrary to what I heard being alluded to earlier, are not as limited as people have tried to make it, simply to try to add a twist to the Zuma case. Prosecutorial misconduct can be one thing. Political interference in a case can be another thing. We live in a constitutional democracy where a misconduct by the prosecution not only brings the system of justice into disrepute, but it actually affects the fairness of the trial in a very fundamental way. For instance, if the prosecution hides exculpatory evidence, that is, evidence that could actually show that you are innocent, but they make sure that the witness who's supposed to testify in your favor disappears, or the statement is, you are not being told that another witness has actually come up with evidence that could actually set you free. If the prosecution destroys evidence that could help you, there is a number of things. And this myth that somehow the SCA decided that the motive, egregious political motives, interference in a case based on political considerations, that somehow doesn't matter, that motives don't matter. It's a lot of nonsense. If you look at the Constitution, we have a Constitution, we live in a constitutional democracy. All the guarantees of equal protection of the law, rule of law, they all will be meaningless if we were to say that a ulterior motive in prosecuting someone wouldn't matter. For instance, if I decided that you and a white person have committed a similar offense, but I decide that because you are black, I'm going to prosecute you, and the white person is going to be let scot-free. My motives, that discriminatory motive, is relevant. You can raise it, and the case can be dismissed on the fact that there is selective prosecution. So I don't understand when people keep harping on this, law professors and other so-called experts, talking about this nonsense about motives not being an issue when it comes to criminal prosecution. Under our Constitution, it is an issue. And this is one of the issues that in the Zuma case will never go away. And I can say without fear of contradiction that his permanent stay application has very reasonable prospects of success.
We're just coming to studio. Professor, let me start with you. Talk to us about some of the political interference aspects of the case, and if former President Jacob Zuma has not already been convicted in the public court, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, when you said professor, I thought you referred to him.
Well, we've got two professors tonight, so the professor to me.
Professor.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, let's first start with the public opinion. If you're to ask anybody in this country whether Jacob Zuma is corrupt, they'll tell you the answer is yes. Because we have had the 17 years of something that gets repeated, and after some time, what people now expect from the court is simply to confirm that which the media has actually said. We've had the same scenario with former President Thabo Mbeki, where even some of us participated in bringing the issue of arms deal, where people were promoted on the basis of making assumptions that the former president Thabo Mbeki and his cabinet were guilty. You had the newspapers. I mean, it was almost a given. Books were written. People became editors of newspapers on the basis of the work that they've done. But when he appeared and he asked, where's the evidence? The very same people who have been beating the drums for a number of years. Actually, President Mbeki said, for 16 years, I had to listen to all this nonsense. And repeated many times. So he was already convicted in public opinion. But when he appeared before the Seriti, his accusers could not bring. So that's why it's very important that we must separate, and also why the courts themselves should not be, or judges should not be persuaded or should not be influenced by the media. But we also know that our judges are influenced by the media. Actually, the Chief Justice himself once even commented that there are judges who come up with judgments where in mind, as they come, they are already thinking about how the media is going to put it. So there is that pressure where you talk about the rule of media instead of rule of law. And some people have actually raised concerns around that. So we hope that when this case ultimately is heard, all the issues that are on the table will be brought in. And when you listen to the judge today, he was also making a point, actually dismissing the argument that was presented by the prosecution that says this thing can be handled in 4 weeks. Says this has, and reminding people that this case has been ongoing since 2001. That is, you have had 17 years. And yes, the prosecution may have been very alive to it. But when you have a new team, a defense team, in fairness, you will have to give them time, as he put it, that you can't say just because you are eager and because you want to deal with the case, then say, no, it must be held in. So he ruled against the request or submission of the prosecution. But also remember, there are also other people who have always said the former president must have his day in court, as he had said. But what they also do is that also they are being dishonest, because this case has been in court where he had appeared before. He appeared before Herbert Msimang. He also appeared, who then also said this case has been moving from one disaster to another, or limping from one disaster to another. And also before Vuka Shabalala and Nicholson. So this former president had appeared in court. And of course, Nicholson's judgment was overturned by Judge Harms. And now it has been brought back. But I think it would be very important that when this case is heard, it must be dealt with meticulously, where we separate fact from fiction. But yes, the president's name has been tarnished, as the judge said, that when the thing is delayed for a long time, I mean, actually it was Professor Force, then the accused become almost tarnished in the public eye. And there is no doubt that President Zuma has done that. And of course, there's also another argument, just to finish, that people have actually said, no, but he is also to blame because he adopted what they call Stalingrad was him. But I can tell you, if you are the accused, you have to take every measure possible that is an avenue that the law has made possible for you to defend yourself. And one of those is also to point out some of what Paul calls prosecutorial misconduct. If we want to make sure that if I'm tried, the prosecution must be seen to be above board. It cannot come to court with the dirty hands and expect that the court must turn a blind eye to its own misconduct.
Now, Professor Guto, just coming to you, what do you think are the prospects of former President Jacob Zuma having a fair trial, especially in light of what Professor Sepp has mentioned with the mainstream media peddling a certain narrative about him?
If we put it in the context of what we have seen, just the clips before this interview, you have people playing politics, like Andile Sitana and so on, Black First, Land First, and so on. They are playing politics, and they're blaming the other side of playing politics. So we have to be careful that we don't move to emotions and so on, and that is the game they're playing. Secondly, in this particular case, I think President Jacob Zuma ought to have his day in court. And having that means that let the courts be able to hear evidence that is before them, to test them, cross-examine them, and decide whether there is really proof beyond reasonable doubt, because these are criminal matters. And we are not allowing that to go forward by all this dodging and talking about his being undermined. No, I think he ought to be tried in a court of law, but the procedure, the due process ought to take place. That is where I would come from. You also have questions of, I think, and Professor Siepe was right, even though he says he's not professor, it's me. But I think it is important to be able to see here that the court was right today in being able to say President Jacob Zuma has a new team of about 4 or 5 senior counsel, junior counsels accompanying them, a new attorney. And they couldn't have done that within the period when this took place. And I think they need more time, and the judge was right on that, to really say, let it take place in November. The other side, which I think will become very problematic, is which needs to be revealed in court of who is paying for this. Because the state has already indicated, the government has already stated, that it did reach agreement with Jacob Zuma that it will provide 1 senior counsel and 2 junior counsels in his trial. But Zuma has brought really very, very expensive 4 or 5 senior counsel, junior counsels, a new attorney, and so on. So who is going to pay for that? We know that Jacob Zuma has been compromised in terms of financial resources. So somebody is paying for that. Is it part of paying back for the corruptions or whatever took place? So there's a lot in this case which needs to be open, discussed openly and honestly, so that justice is seen to be done and not only say it has been done because it went to court. It must be seen to be done.
Well, actually, we're going to be running out of time soon, so I need you to shorten your answers just a little bit, Professor, as you jump in.
Yeah, I think, let me state this. In the court today, the judge was interested in whether the issue of paying is resolved. And the defense team said yes. And yes, we can have an interest in that matter. But that matter is not what the court is going to be deciding on. The court is focusing on the very charges. And this is why Judge Msimang, actually the current judge, did not even bother to get into that. So let's not bring issues that are irrelevant here. Then there's also issue of misconduct by the state. It cannot be, and actually I'm surprised that Professor Guto takes it lightly. If the state misbehaves, we expect that the court should make that comment on that. And I say I want to appear in a court of law where public power, when it is dispensed in such a way that I see that it is fair. We cannot have the state misbehaving. We've already had the public protector who had said in the past that Jacob Zuma's rights has been violated, and it has been accepted. What has been different is that we've had the Chief Justice and the Constitutional Court saying if the rights of an individual have been violated, then or the public protector comes up with a finding, that finding stands until it is reviewed. I'm not aware that that has been brought to the court for reviewal. So it will be some of the issues that are going to be raised. This is why the Defense Counsel, when he made the presentation, made clear that as they go towards a permanent stay of prosecution, they are going to be raising these issues. And these are not minor issues. Some of us who are not even lawyers are aware that in other countries like the United States, where there is a prosecutorial misconduct, the case gets thrown out because it is very clear in that country that the state cannot come to court with dirty hands.
Well, Mr. Ngubeni, actually, just in 2 minutes, just give us your closing comments and also what other perhaps constitutional rights of former President Jacob Zuma you think have been violated.
Well, first of all, let me just comment very quickly to say that the prosecution team doesn't seem to even be aware of its own case or of the procedural background to this case. If you may recall, before this case was withdrawn by Mr. Mche, the prosecution and Mr. Zuma's team, legal team, had agreed that the next step in the case was that Mr. Zuma was going to file an application for a permanent stay. So this is not surprising that now the team is actually saying we are going to be filed in permanent stay. So for the prosecution to say we are ready for trial, that's actually is very misleading and being very dishonest to start with. But in terms of the violation of Mr. Zuma's rights, as Professor Siepe has correctly pointed out, first there was a public protector finding that Mr. Zuma's rights had been violated. In terms of delay, procedural delays, Judge Msimanga made a finding, which was that the state had delayed and it was the case was limping from one disaster to another. There was a lot of procrastination on the part of the prosecution, and he ended up getting the case struck from the roll. Now there is also the issue of political interference. We have, as South Africans, very dishonestly engaged in this collective mindset that somehow that issue will go away. As long as we denounce Zuma as a person, that somehow the issue of political interference will go away. It will never go away. It's going to require a judge to ask himself whether in our constitutional democracy it's ever okay to have the prosecutors operating out of political motives, manipulating the timing of a trial, the timing of filing of charges, to coincide with political events.
Well, Mr. Ngubeni, I do have to interject you there. We are out of time, but we understand some of the issues that are at hand that you've all presented, as well as our professors in studio here. And clearly we need a fair trial. We need a judge that's unbiased and uninfluenced by politics or other external factors. The conversation does continue online, so you can give us your comments on our Twitter handle at AfroWorldView. It is time now for a short break, but do stay tuned for more news and updates.